The sound of the front door deadbolt clicking into place was louder than the thunderstorm soaking my 2 garbage bags of belongings. My own mother had just kicked me out over my sister's destroyed marriage. The reason? A masterclass in manipulation. But the truth was hiding in a single email that would soon destroy them both. If you want to understand how a mother can look her youngest daughter in the eye and tell her she is dead to her, you have to understand the dynamic of the Gallagher household. I grew up in a suffocating suburb just outside of Boston, Massachusetts. In our house, there were 2 distinct realities: Jessica's world and the background noise. I was the background noise. Jessica was 3 years older than me, and to my mother, Barbara, she was the second coming. Jess was a competitive dancer, a varsity cheerleader, and possessed this terrifying magnetic charisma that could bend almost anyone to her will. She didn't just walk into rooms, she held court. My mother enabled every single narcissistic tendency Jess had. If Jess got a bad grade, the teacher was incompetent. If Jess got into a fight, the other girl was jealous. I, on the other hand, was the pragmatic, quiet sister. I got my accounting degree, paid my own rent at a modest apartment across town, and visited on Sundays for dinner. I was the designated audience for Jessica's life. When Jessica met David Sterling, my mother acted like we had just married into the Kennedys. David was a genuinely good man, a successful structural engineer, patient, soft-spoken, and wildly oblivious to the psychological warfare my sister was capable of. Their wedding in Nantucket cost upwards of $80,000, completely draining my mother's savings. I stood at the altar in a muted taupe dress Jessica picked out specifically to wash out my complexion, watching David look at my sister like she was an angel. I remember feeling a pit in my stomach, wondering how long it would take for him to see the cracks in the porcelain. It took exactly 4 years. By the 3rd year of their marriage, David looked perpetually exhausted. Jessica was always out with the girls, taking lavish weekend trips to Miami or Aspen, while David worked 80-hour weeks to fund a lifestyle that was rapidly expanding beyond his means. I started noticing things. A text message popping up on her locked screen at Thanksgiving from someone named Aaron Jim that said, "Can't wait for tonight." The way she would immediately flip her phone face down if David walked into the room. I kept my mouth shut. It wasn't my marriage, and in the Gallagher family, crossing Jessica was a death sentence. Then came the 2nd week of October. I was at my mother's house, helping her fix a plumbing issue under her kitchen sink, because Jess certainly wasn't going to do it. The front door blew open, slamming against the drywall with a sickening crack. It was Jessica. Her mascara was smeared down her cheeks, her designer trench coat half falling off her shoulders. She collapsed onto the kitchen island in a heap of theatrical, hyperventilating sobs. My mother dropped the wrench she was handing me and rushed to her. "Jessie! Baby, what's wrong? What happened?" "He kicked me out," Jessica wailed, burying her face in her hands. "David threw my suitcases on the driveway. He's filing for divorce, Mum." I froze, sitting back on my heels. I felt a pang of sympathy for David, assuming he had finally caught her in one of her lies. But then, Jessica slowly lifted her head. Her bloodshot eyes locked onto mine, and the sorrow on her face instantly morphed into a look of cold, calculated venom. "And it's her fault," Jessica hissed, pointing a manicured finger right at my chest. My mother slowly turned to look at me, her brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" Jessica launched into the most elaborate, terrifyingly seamless lie I had ever heard in my 26 years of life. She told my mother that for the past 6 months, I had been obsessively stalking David. She claimed I had been showing up at his architectural firm unannounced, sending him inappropriate emails from anonymous accounts and trying to seduce him. But that wasn't the worst of it. When David rejected her, Jessica choked out, squeezing out fresh tears. She decided to ruin my life out of spite. She hired someone to fake a bunch of text messages, making it look like I was having an affair with my personal trainer. She mailed printed copies of them to David's office. He thinks I'm a whore, Mum. He thinks I've been cheating on him because my own sister framed me. The silence in the kitchen was deafening. I actually laughed, a short, breathless sound of pure shock. It was so absurd, so entirely unhinged, that I expected my mother to tell Jessica she was being ridiculous. I didn't even know the name of her trainer. I barely spoke to David outside of family functions. "Mum," I started, wiping the grease off my hands with a rag. "That is insane. I haven't spoken to David in 3 months. Jess, what are you doing?" I looked at my mother, waiting for the voice of reason. Instead, I saw a terrifying transformation. Barbara's face drained of color, and then a dark, purplish rage crept up her neck. She didn't question the logistics. She didn't ask for proof. She simply looked at her golden child, broken and weeping, and then looked at me, the scapegoat. "You," my mother whispered, her voice trembling with a rage I had never heard before. "You have always been jealous of her. Always." "Mum, are you listening to yourself?" I stood up, my heart hammering against my ribs. I work 60 hours a week at the firm. When exactly would I have the time to forge a dossier of fake text messages? "Call David right now. He'll tell you this is a lie." "Don't you dare bring him into this," Jessica screamed, slamming her hands on the counter. "He blocked my number. He doesn't want to speak to anyone from this family because of what you did. You ruined my life." "I want you out of my house," my mother said. Her voice wasn't loud, which made it infinitely worse. It was hollow, absolute. "Mum, please, just use logic for 1 second." "I said get out!" she shrieked, grabbing a ceramic coffee mug from the counter and hurling it in my direction. It didn't hit me, but it shattered against the floorboards, spraying hot coffee and ceramic shards against my shins. "You are sick. You are a vindictive, malicious monster. Get your things out of the guest room, give me my spare key, and get off my property. You are no daughter of mine." There is a specific kind of trauma that occurs when the person who gave you life looks at you with unadulterated hatred. My brain short-circuited. I didn't argue anymore. I could see the faint trace of a smirk hiding behind the tissue Jessica was pressing to her eyes. She had won. She had successfully diverted the explosion of her infidelities onto me, securing our mother's unconditional shelter and sympathy in one brutal move. I walked upstairs with my legs feeling like lead. I had been staying in the guest room for a week while my apartment was being fumigated. I grabbed 2 black heavy-duty garbage bags from the hall closet and began numbly throwing my clothes, my laptop, and my toiletries into them. 20 minutes later, I walked down the stairs. My mother and Jessica were sitting on the couch. My mother was stroking Jessica's hair. Neither of them looked at me. I left the spare key on the console table. The heavy deadbolt sliding shut behind me sounded like a gunshot. It was pouring rain. I dragged the bags to my 2012 Honda Civic, threw them into the back seat, and sat behind the steering wheel. I was soaked to the bone. I pulled out my phone and dialed David's number. I needed to know what Jessica had actually done, and I needed him to clear my name with my mother. "We're sorry. The number you have reached is not in service or has been temporarily disconnected." Jessica hadn't just lied. She had ensured I couldn't verify the truth. I later found out through a mutual friend that Jessica had used David's phone before he kicked her out to preemptively block my number, my mother's number, and anyone else who could bridge the communication gap. David had also taken an immediate leave of absence from his firm and retreated to a cabin he owned in upstate New York to process the divorce. He was a ghost. The next 6 months were the darkest period of my life. I moved back into my apartment, but the isolation was suffocating. My mother made good on her promise. I was completely excommunicated. When Thanksgiving rolled around, I sat alone in my kitchen, eating a microwaved turkey dinner, scrolling through Instagram. My aunt had posted a photo of the extended family gathered around my mother's dining table. Jessica was front and center, looking tragic but brave, holding a glass of wine. I had been entirely erased from the narrative. Rumors filtered back to me through cousins who felt brave enough to text me. The story Jessica had spun grew wilder with every retelling. Now, I wasn't just a saboteur. I was unhinged. I was a home wrecker. Relatives I had known my whole life blocked me on social media. I lost my family overnight because it was easier for them to believe I was a villain than to accept that their beloved pageant queen was a chronic, destructive liar. I threw myself into my work as a defense mechanism. I got a promotion. I started dating a guy named Ryan, a high school teacher who listened to my family saga with horrified fascination and held me when I woke up crying from nightmares about my mother's screaming face. I was healing, slowly building a wall around the hollowed-out space where my family used to be. I had accepted that I would never get closure. I had accepted that Jessica had gotten away with it. Then came a dreary Tuesday evening in early April. I was sitting on my sofa with Ryan, watching a documentary, my laptop resting open on the coffee table. The soft ping of an incoming email chimed through the quiet living room. I leaned forward and tapped the trackpad to wake the screen. The notification banner in the top right corner displayed an email from an address I hadn't seen in nearly a year. Sender, David Sterling. Subject, we need to talk. Urgent. My breath caught in my throat. My hands began to shake so violently that I almost knocked a glass of water off the table as I reached for the mouse. Ryan paused the TV, immediately noticing my posture. Sarah? What is it? He asked gently. I clicked the email open. The contents of that message would not only unravel Jessica's perfectly constructed 6-month lie, but it would set off an explosive chain reaction that would force my mother to face the horrifying reality of exactly who she had been protecting. My eyes scanned the glowing screen of my laptop, the blue light harsh against the dimly lit living room. Ryan placed a comforting hand on my shoulder, his thumb rubbing small circles into my collarbone, but I barely registered his touch. My entire focus was locked onto the words David Sterling had typed. The email was not a plea for reconciliation with my sister. It was a lifeline thrown into the dark waters I had been drowning in for 6 months. Sarah, I know you have every right to ignore this. I have been entirely off the grid since October. I spent the last few months at the cabin in the Adirondacks, just trying to put the pieces of my life back together. I am writing to you now because I am so incredibly sorry. I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know what she was doing. I hired a forensic data recovery firm in Manhattan for the divorce proceedings, because something about her financial disclosures wasn't adding up. They gained access to her old iCloud backups, the ones she thought she permanently deleted when she smashed her phone in the driveway the night I kicked her out. I have everything, Sarah. The texts with Aaron Buckley, the hotel receipts. But worse, I have the screenshots of her conversations with her friends, where she explicitly outlined exactly how she was going to frame you. I need you to meet me tomorrow. Bring a lawyer if you want. I have a flash drive and a physical binder of the unredacted discovery files. I need your help, and you deserve the truth. O'Hara's Diner in Newton. 2 p.m. David. I read it 3 times. The air rushed out of my lungs in a staggered, heavy exhale. Ryan leaned over, reading the screen over my shoulder. "Oh my God," he whispered. "She planned it. It wasn't just a spontaneous lie to save herself. She calculated the whole thing." "But why?" I murmured, my mind racing. "Why go to those lengths to destroy me? She already had my mother wrapped around her finger. Throwing me under the bus wasn't just collateral damage, it was an assassination." The next afternoon, the April sky was a bruising, slate grey as I pulled into the parking lot of O'Hara's Diner in Newton. I walked into the establishment, the smell of stale coffee and frying oil hitting my nose. I spotted David sitting in a back booth. My heart ached for him. The man who had once been a vibrant, successful structural engineer looked like a hollowed-out shell. He had lost at least 20 pounds. His cheekbones were sharp and dark. Bruised circles hung beneath his eyes. I slid into the vinyl booth across from him. He didn't offer a polite greeting. He just slid a heavy, thick manila folder across the Formica table. "I am so sorry, Sarah," David said, his voice raw, like he had swallowed glass. "She had me convinced you were losing your mind. She showed me printed emails from an anonymous Proton Mail account detailing my daily schedule. She said you were unhinged. When she confessed that you had faked the cheating allegations to ruin her, I was just so exhausted. I believed her." I opened the folder. The first page was a printed text message thread between Jessica and a contact saved as Aaron Jim. The messages were graphic, undeniable proof of an affair that had been going on for over 14 months. They had taken trips to Montauk on David's credit cards, disguised as wellness retreats for Jessica's anxiety. But it was the second tab in the binder that made my blood run cold. It was a group chat between Jessica and 2 of her closest enablers, Megan and Ashley. Jessica, September 28th. David is getting suspicious about the Amex bill. I need a distraction. Megan, September 28th. Just cry and say you went shopping for his birthday. It always works. Jessica, September 28th. No, the Montauk charges are too high. I need something bigger. Plus, tax season is coming up in a few months. Sarah usually does Mum's taxes in January. Ashley, September 29th. What does Sarah have to do with anything? Jessica, September 29th. Everything. If Sarah looks at Mum's home equity line of credit this year, I am dead. I took out $65,000 against the house. Mum signed the papers thinking it was for the kitchen remodel, but I used it to pay off Aaron's car and my credit cards. If Sarah sees the statements, she'll tell Mum. I stopped reading. The diner around me seemed to spin into a sickening blur. The waitress dropped off 2 mugs of black coffee, but the clatter of the ceramic sounded like it was coming from underwater. "She stole from my mother," I whispered, the realization hitting me with the force of a freight train. "She didn't just frame me because of the divorce. I'm an accountant. Every January, I sit at my mother's dining room table and do her annual taxes. Jessica needed me out of that house, permanently exiled before the new year hit. Framing me for your divorce was just the vehicle. It was a cover-up for felony wire fraud and elder financial abuse." David nodded slowly, wrapping his hands around the hot coffee mug. "My lawyer, Richard Blaine, traced the funds. Your sister forged your mother's signature on the secondary disbursement checks. When I found out she was cheating, she panicked. She knew her world was collapsing, so she created a nuclear explosion to blind everyone. By making you the villain, she ensured your mother would cut you off, meaning you would never get your hands on those bank statements." The sheer sociopathy of it was breathtaking. Jessica had weaponized our mother's favoritism to literally rob her blind, and discarded me like trash to hide the evidence. "What do you want to do, David?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm. The sadness that had weighed me down for 6 months instantly evaporated, replaced by a cold, surgical fury. "My divorce mediation is scheduled for next Thursday," David said. "But your mother is hosting her annual spring brunch this Sunday. All your aunts, uncles, everyone who blocked you on Facebook and called you a homewrecker, they will all be there. I am technically still her son-in-law, and I RSVP'd yes. I told Barbara I wanted to come and make peace before the divorce is finalized. She was thrilled." He looked up at me, his eyes hardening into flint. "I have 50 printed copies of this binder, Sarah. Let's go to brunch." Sunday morning arrived with a mocking brilliance. The sun was shining, birds were chirping, and the wealthy Boston suburbs looked like a postcard of domestic tranquility. Ryan drove my Honda Civic, tailing David's sleek Audi SUV as we navigated the winding, tree-lined streets of my childhood neighborhood. My stomach was a knot of pure adrenaline and dread. The street was lined with cars: Aunt Carol's Lexus, Uncle Thomas's BMW, my cousin Liam's Jeep. The entire Gallagher clan was gathered inside, likely sipping mimosas and praising Jessica for her resilience in the face of her traumatic year. David parked in the driveway. Ryan and I parked a house down, waiting. The plan was simple. David would go in first, establish his presence, and gauge the room. 5 minutes later, I would walk through the front door. I sat in the passenger seat, gripping the door handle until my knuckles turned white. Ryan reached over and squeezed my hand. "You don't have to do this if you're not ready," he said softly. "We can just send the binder to a lawyer." "No," I replied, staring at the brass numbers on my mother's mailbox. "A lawyer handles the money. I need to handle the truth. I need them to look at me." I checked my watch. 5 minutes. I stepped out of the car, carrying a thick leather briefcase that held my copies of the evidence, and walked up the paved driveway. The front door was unlocked, as it always was during family parties. I pushed it open. The dull roar of 20 people chatting over smooth jazz drifted from the formal dining room and the sunroom. I walked down the hardwood hallway, my heels clicking methodically. As I stepped into the archway of the living room, the conversation didn't stop immediately. It died in a slow, awkward wave, like a record winding down. Aunt Carol was the first to spot me. She lowered her champagne flute, her jaw dropping. Uncle Thomas stopped mid-laugh. My mother, Barbara, emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of bruschetta. She stopped dead in her tracks, the color violently drained from her face, leaving her looking sickly and grey. And then, from the corner of the room, standing next to David, was Jessica. She was wearing a pristine white sundress, holding a cup of tea, looking like a tragic Victorian widow. When she saw me, her eyes widened in absolute terror. "What are you doing in my house?" my mother demanded, her voice shaking with an instantly rekindled rage. "I told you that if you ever stepped foot on this property again, I would call the police. Thomas, call 911. "Nobody is calling the police." David's voice boomed over the rising murmurs. He stepped away from Jessica and moved to the center of the room, standing beside me. The room gasped collectively. To them, I was the woman who had stalked and harassed him. Seeing us stand side by side shattered their entire understanding of the narrative. "David, get away from her!" Jessica shrieked, her voice pitching into a hysterical frequency. "Mum, make her leave! She's crazy!" "Shut up, Jessica," David snapped. The venom in his voice was so sharp it physically silenced the room. He reached into his leather messenger bag and pulled out a stack of manila folders. Without another word, he began passing them out. One to Aunt Carol, one to Uncle Thomas, one to my cousin Liam. "What is this?" my mother asked, her hands trembling as she set the tray of appetizers down on the coffee table. "That, Barbara, is the truth," I said, stepping forward. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I spoke with the detached, clinical precision of an accountant reviewing a ledger. For 6 months, I have been exiled from this family. I have been called a stalker, a saboteur, and a home wrecker. You threw me out into the rain without asking a single question, Mum. You chose her word over my life. "Because you ruined her marriage," my mother yelled, though she was looking nervously at the folders the family was now opening. "Turn to page 4, Aunt Carol," David instructed loudly. The sound of rustling paper filled the quiet room. Aunt Carol put on her reading glasses. Her eyes scanned the page. A loud gasp escaped her lips, and she covered her mouth with a trembling hand, looking up at Jessica with absolute disgust. Page 4 is a series of photographs and hotel receipts documenting Jessica's 14-month affair with a personal trainer named Aaron Buckley, David explained, staring directly at my mother, including a romantic weekend in Montauk that she charged to my American Express. "That's a lie!" Jessica screamed, tears immediately streaming down her face. "Mom, they fabricated this. Sarah is trying to ruin me again." "Turn to page 12, I said, my voice cutting through her hysterics. I looked right at my mother. Page 12 is a transcript of an iCloud backup from Jessica's phone, legally subpoenaed by David's attorneys last month. Read it, Mum. Read the group chat. My mother, hands shaking violently, took a folder from Uncle Thomas. She flipped to the back. I watched her eyes dart back and forth across the highlighted text. I watched the exact moment her reality crumbled. Her knees buckled slightly, and Uncle Thomas had to grab her elbow to keep her upright. "A home equity line of credit?" my mother whispered, her voice barely audible. She looked up at Jessica, her eyes filled with a horror I had never seen before. $65,000. You told me those papers were for the zoning permits for the kitchen. "She needed me out of the house, Mum," I said gently, though the words were weapons. "She knew I do your taxes every January. If I saw the 1098 form from the bank, I would see the secondary mortgage. I would see the interest you were paying on money you never received. She didn't just frame me for a divorce. She framed me so I wouldn't catch her stealing your retirement." "Jessie," my mother choked out, turning to her golden child. Jessica was backed against the sliding glass door of the sunroom. The mask had completely fallen off. There were no more theatrical tears, no more innocent pouts. She looked trapped, like a cornered animal. "I was going to pay it back. David was suffocating me. I needed to live, Mum. You don't understand the pressure I was under." "You forged my signature," my mother said, stepping toward her. The adoration that had blinded my mother for 29 years was gone, replaced by the devastating realization that she had nurtured a parasite. "You let me throw your sister out on the street. You let me disown my own daughter to hide your theft." The room erupted. Aunt Carol started yelling at Jessica. Uncle Thomas was demanding to see my mother's bank app. David stood quietly, his posture finally relaxed, watching the empire of lies burn to the ground. I didn't stay to watch the ashes smolder. I had achieved exactly what I came for. I turned around and walked back down the hallway. "Sarah! Wait!" I stopped at the front door and turned around. My mother was rushing down the hallway, tears streaming down her face, her hands reaching out for me. She looked 10 years older than she had 20 minutes ago. "Sarah, please," she sobbed, grabbing my forearm. "I am so sorry. Oh my God, what have I done? Please, you have to forgive me. I didn't know." I looked down at her hand on my arm, and then looked into her eyes. I felt no anger anymore. I just felt an overwhelming, hollow pity. "You didn't know because you didn't want to know, Mom," I said softly, gently removing her hand from my arm. When Jessica pointed her finger at me, "You didn't ask for proof. You didn't ask for my side. You threw a coffee mug at my head and told me I wasn't your daughter. You made your choice that day. I can fix it. We can call the police on her. We can get the money back. Please." "I don't care about the money," I replied, stepping out onto the porch. "And I don't care to fix this. You chose your reality. Now you have to live in it." I walked down the driveway, got into the passenger seat of my car, and looked at Ryan. He put the car in reverse, and we drove away, leaving the Gallagher house and the screaming behind us forever. Sometimes the deepest betrayals don't come from enemies, but from the people tasked with protecting us. That afternoon shattered the illusion of my family, but it rebuilt my own self-worth. David won his divorce and recovered the stolen funds, while my mother was left to navigate the financial ruin her golden child created. I walked away without looking back, finally stepping out of the background noise to compose my own life.